Hello and welcome. This is Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. My name is Sarah Tekert. In the previous episode, we have met Afstandsmoeder Trudy Schredegertse, and we have heard her experience. Today, we are going to meet Wil van Sebille, Afstandsmoeder and founder of the organization the Nederlandse Afstandsmoeder. In 1991, Wil has published her book, Opgestaan, plaats, vergaan. In 1996, Wil took part in the production of the documentary alle, Stilte. This film follows her searching for her son, whom she had to give up when she got pregnant in 1967. For this podcast, Wil has decided that she doesn't wish to talk about her experience again in order to protect herself. But she has agreed that an interview from 2020 may be used. In the first part of this episode, you will hear parts of this interview. In the second half, Wil is going to talk with me about her activism and her support of the Afstandsmoeders for the last 3 decades. Welcome, Wil van Sebille. In 1967, you found out that you were pregnant. What happened afterwards?
When my parents found out, we went to the Catholic Office for Mother Support. Their immediate solution for this situation was giving up my child. So it happened that one day I went to school, and next day I was put in a car on the way to Switzerland, where an aunt and uncle of mine lived and worked. This was far away enough, and people at home were told that I had a mental condition because I have failed in the school the previous year. This was why I had to leave for a while. The first 3 months were meant as a vacation and then additional 3 months as work. After a while, I returned to the Netherlands and was brought into a host family in Leiden and then later into a mother-baby home. There I gave birth and 10 days later I had to leave. I went home with my parents. My son stayed behind and I thought that he had stayed in this mother-baby home. But much later I found out that he was first hospitalized for 6 weeks. I learned about that some 40-50 years later.
What was your parents' reaction to the advice that you should give up your child?
I do not remember much from those conversations. For sure, it was a very convenient solution for them, as they mostly worried that the situation could cause them a lot of shame. This was also why I had to leave so quickly, before other people would have noticed. They clearly found it the best solution to make me give up my child.
And what about your boyfriend?
My boyfriend went to the same high school as me, but he simply stayed at home and he was not really involved in the situation. I later saw a statement in my documents which read, "Got pregnant by a false friend." But he was just a normal boy at the age of 17. But what was written there sounds like he had committed some crimes or that he took drugs, but he was nothing like that.
Was there sexual education at school back in the days?
Not at school and not at home. The only thing we knew was that we must not do it and that it caused pregnancies. I also had no idea what to expect from giving birth. I came from a family with 5 children, but I still didn't know anything. In the biology class at school, we once had a lesson about semen and cells, but that was very technical. On the other hand, at least, that teacher wanted to give us a bit of knowledge, but apart from that, there was nothing. Sexuality was a topic about which people didn't speak.
What kind of place was this mother-baby home, and how many girls and women were there?
There were girls and older women. I remember that I found it strange that there was a woman of 31 years of age, and I thought, how strange. At that age, you do not need to listen to your parents anymore. But of course, you never know a person's situation. I remember thinking, if I only was 21, then I'd pick up my child and leave. We were also instructed to not talk about our lives to each other. Most of the time, we had to help around the house, but apart from that, it was boring. There was nothing to do. We also had to talk to the social workers and to a psychologist there. Also, there was a priest whom we had to talk to, but he was mainly interested in details about how we have done it. He was just a nasty old guy. Just imagine this situation. The girls were alone for several months, completely isolated, desperate to keep their children, and everybody tells them that they have to give them away. I remember asking one of the members of the staff, what if I just grab him and live with him? But if you were underage and your parents didn't want you to keep your baby, you would have been sent to a home for problematic girls, and your baby would have been sent to a children's home. Do you really want that? Then he won't be able to be adopted and he would have to stay there for years. Of course, that's something no mother wants to happen. So the documents state that the mothers have agreed. They claimed that I had a choice, but I was never informed that I had a 3-month period of reconsideration, and I was never told that I was entitled to social welfare and support to find a place to live. The only thing they have said was, it is not allowed and it is not possible. Also, in this mother-baby home, the girls were not allowed to talk to each other. We had no way to get information and we were completely isolated. Unlike today, we had no access to information. We weren't able to simply go to a library or to ask certain officers or the authorities.
Lag dat nergens. Ik bedoel, je kon ook niet naar een bibliotheek gaan. Dat was allemaal onderhand zo.
In this mother-baby home, you also gave birth to your son. Can you describe this experience?
Ik weet van de bevalling weet ik helemaal niets. Ik weet niet hoe
I do not remember anything about giving birth, and I can't recall how I ended up in the birth room. It is just a black hole in my memory. For some time, I thought that I needed to try to work on this. There are techniques to regain the memory. But then I have decided that I didn't want to do that. For whom should I recollect those memories now? It is just a black hole. The only thing I remember is that I have heard him crying after he was born. This was such an enormous feeling of happiness, and I just wanted to hold him. But he was taken from me immediately. I'm not able to tell whether I tried to sit up to see him. In my memory, it is not only a black hole, it is also very dark. As if everything what has happened in a room with very low lights. The only memory I have is his cry and my feeling of happiness. Also, I can recall that the nurses have complained. Nobody had told me anything about how to give birth, so I had pushed way too much and I tore. So the nurses were annoyed that now they had to take care of me as well. Only 40 years later I have learned from the files that my son was born too early and that he had to be brought to the hospital. Nobody had told me that either. But this part of my documents has also conveniently disappeared now.
After you had given birth in this mother-baby home, you had to leave this mother-baby home, you went back to your parents, and then they never talked about it again?
Yes, it was not allowed to talk about it ever again. The social workers said that I'd just go back to my previous life and would just go on with it. Just don't talk about it anymore. Otherwise, other people may think bad of you.
Did you ever go back to this mother-baby home to let them know that you want to take care of your son?
At that time, I never went back to the mother-baby home, but I was, however, in correspondence with the social workers. My son was born in April, and in September I have again said that I want him back. But my parents were totally against it. After that, I also went back to the relationship with my boyfriend, the father of my son. And few years later, we also got married. Between 1967 and 1971, we have tried multiple times to get our son back. We were in contact with the social workers and with the Child Care and Protection Board. But it was clear, as soon as someone has left the mother-baby home, there was no more chance.
What was their reaction? That it was simply too late?
When we were about to get married and when we informed the social workers about our wedding plans, they have said that this wasn't sufficient. We would have had to be married for at least 5 years. And in the meantime, our child would have had to stay in a children's home because he couldn't have lived with our family. And of course, that's not what we wanted.
In the meantime, your son had already been brought to another family.
In September, the social worker told me that he was already living in a family, but I later found out through my file that this wasn't the case before December. I'm still under the impression, but of course I cannot prove that he was already promised to a certain adoptive family even before he was born.
Did you ever sign a document that you want to give up your son?
I have never signed a document. Officially, the adoption papers need to be signed when the mother turns 21 and becomes an adult. At that time, my boyfriend and I were already married, and we had a second child together. I didn't want to sign anything, and I thought now is the only chance to get him back. So this has turned into a law case, which we had won at first. Our son was supposed to be given back to us, but the adoptive parents then took an appeal. There was supposed to be an official visit to the adoptive parents and to us, but nobody ever came to see us because it was already decided that he was a problematic boy and that he wouldn't be able to handle the change. But in another document it was stated that he was just a normal boy.
These days, some people say that it was just the zeitgeist of this time. What is your reaction to that?
Of course, it also was the zeitgeist of the time. But what is that people want to say with this? That we need to keep our mouths shut? That it was just the way it was? Even if it has been the zeitgeist, that doesn't change that awful things have happened.
Unfortunately, it was not possible for you to claim back your son. And then it took 33 years until you saw him again.
I had never told other people about him nor about my pregnancy. After the law case, I felt like I never wanted to talk about this topic again. But of course, it resurfaced after a few years. I was also never allowed to go back to school. I had had my chance, and now I had to work. But when my children, in total we have 3, started going to school, I had decided for myself that I wanted to do the same. Then things started to change. I met my second husband, I got divorced, I finished one study and I started the second one. We moved in together, and with all these big changes, the story also resurfaced again. In 1986, I went to a support group that was organized by FIOM for Afstandsmoeders. At that time, I also tried to reach out to my son, but he made it very clear that he wasn't interested. 4 years later, when he was 21, I have sent him a letter. He sent this letter back, reminding me again that he didn't wish any further contact with me. This way, I have lost him again, because I had also lost the hope that I will be able to be in touch with him. On the other hand, if a person states so clearly that they don't wish to be in touch, who am I to keep pushing? At that time, my oldest daughter had also been told that she had another brother and she wanted to get in touch with him. But at that time, she was leaving the house to go to study and other things had priority first. In 1996, I took part in the documentary in alle, Stilte. And this was the moment when my daughter decided to go to find her brother by herself. She found his address and she just went there to meet him. She found him and they clicked with each other immediately. But after that, it took another 3 years. In the meantime, he had met his second sister too, before he finally decided that he wanted to meet me as well.
Were you thinking of him in the meantime?
Every day. From the very first moment, he was a part of me. He was a part of my body. And even when he was not with me, he was always there, all these years.
How is your relationship with him these days?
Good, but I am always careful about the way I act around him. During the first years, I found it very difficult to reach out to him. It has always felt like this was something what I wasn't allowed to do. So many times I was told that it would be bad for him if I have reached out, that it would be better if I just forgot him. But of course, that was impossible. So I had the constant feeling of doing something wrong. I always had to overcome myself. At the beginning, with very first visits, I wished that he would stay longer, to stay with us, but I knew that this was impossible. I also didn't want to be too pushy or too clingy, because after all, I am his mother, but at the same time, I'm not his mother. I understand that in this situation I had to follow his tempo, not my own. Nonetheless, I believe that it was good that I have reached out to him. For him, it was good as well. I am sure of that. But still, the trauma never disappears. The feeling of guilt is still there. Shame is maybe too big a word, but for sure, a feeling of uneasiness.
Do you think that this is also the reason why, even today, so many women still don't wish to talk about it?
Imagine this situation. You are young, pregnant, and completely isolated from others, and people keep pressuring you. They tell you that you are bad. After all, it was you who got pregnant. And then keep adding more and more guilt on top of that. First, you were bad for getting pregnant, then you were bad for giving up your child. The woman is split between knowing that this was not what she wanted, but nonetheless, she was the one who got pregnant. In my head, I am the most guilty one, because I didn't manage to keep him with me. Rationally, of course, I know that the system was never designed for me to be able to keep him, but emotionally, I feel like it is my fault. Mine, and just mine. I should have saved him, and I didn't save him. I think that this is a feeling that many afstandsmoeders share. We also need to keep in mind that afstandsmoeders have never gone through a therapy or received any kind of support. After giving birth, they were sent home to continue living their lives. We had delivered our product, and afterwards, we were not useful anymore. And this system, in which the girls or women were raised, had affected them for their entire lives. this will never change.
In the 90s, you founded your organization, the Nederlandse Afstandsmoeder. You published a book and you worked on the documentary in alle, Stilte. What were the reactions you received?
There
was a lot of attention, and this way I also got in touch with Afstandsmoeders. But after it was published, my father had called me to inform me that I was no longer welcome at home, because now everybody knew about my situation, and that was my fault. I know about cases of afstandsmoeders whose parents have later admitted that their way of handling the situation was wrong, but my parents didn't. And I have not seen my parents ever since. This way, I didn't only lose my son, I have lost my entire family system.
This was an interview with Will van Sebille from 2020. Now I will be talking to Will about her organization, the Nederlandse Afstandsmoeder, and the current investigation of the Dutch state. Once again, welcome, Will van Sebille.
Dankjewel. Dag.
In 2016, you started the organization, the Dutch Birth Mother. What was your motivation to do so?
We
were invited by the Dutch parliament to talk about giving up children and about adoption. This was an extension of a report that had been done previously about sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. During this meeting, it became clear that my first organization of afstandsmoeders, which I founded with a group of people in 1994, was now closed by one of the board members. They have claimed an organization like this was no longer needed. At this meeting at the Dutch Parliament, when we spoke about the investigation, it became clear to us that we cannot just be individual afstandsmoeders. We needed another organization. Barbara Klautmans, with whom I was at the meeting that day, and I decided that a new afstandsmoeders organization was needed to connect the women with each other. So we have founded a new organization.
Ja, een nieuwe stichting opgericht.
In April 2020, you received the medal Ridder van de Orde van Oranje-Nassau. What does this mean to you?
Dat is heel dubbel.
I have mixed feelings. I do not love the idea to be knighted as an individual by the royal family, but still, I understood it as a recognition for all afstandsmoeders. And in this context, I gratefully received it. But for me, it was a strange feeling. It was also in the times of Corona, so there weren't a lot of people present. It was mostly about volunteering. When my story was told, I noticed that people seemed to wake up again and raise their hands. My first reaction, however, was, oh no, now everybody knows. And to be honest, the feeling of shame was still there. And it took me a while to be proud of it, but now I understand that it is a well-deserved reward for our work. And when I received the reaction of other afstandsmoeders, then I noticed that this is a real recognition of us as a group.
Ja, van onze groep, zeg maar.
How does it make you feel that you had to fight for decades for the afstandsmoeders and only in the very recent years things seem to finally start moving?
Ja, dan lijkt het net alsof in die afgelopen 30 jaar niks gebeurt.
It may seem like nothing has happened in the course of the past 30 years, but that's not true. Looking back in 1994, when we started the first Afstandsmoeders organization, we were mainly focused on connecting women with each other. The focus was strongly internal, and we have noticed during the meetings at this time that this was highly appreciated. In the following years, things became more public, for example, with a magazine about afstand and adoption, or with a new protocol how to deal with women and their children. We were also in touch with the organization FIOM, that was responsible for the international search for people. But all of this was still mostly for people in our field, not for the public in general. Now the political part is more public. Also because now the adoptees are making themselves heard. In 1994, when we started, they were still very young. This is why it now seems that things are moving, but there was also tension in the previous years. For example, when Afstandsmoeders were on TV. And this was the preparation for what is happening now. But if you ask me now how it feels, then I have to say that it is tiring. Because we keep fighting, and we need to keep fighting in order to not be forgotten. After all, it is not a pleasant topic. But so many people were affected by this awful history that people prefer to not hear about it too much.
Dat men dat ook liever niet al te luid hoort.
What do you think of the investigation that has been done by the Dutch state so far, and the way how afstandsmoeders and afstandskinderen were involved in this?
No, I'm not satisfied with it. I think that only very little has been invested in this investigation by the government. I doubt that they have really understood the core of it and what the system has done to the mothers and their children. To me, it seems like they mostly want to tick boxes. We have done an investigation, check. We have involved afstandmoeders and afstandkinderen in the more detailed investigation, check. We asked about their opinion when something went wrong, check. I feel like there is rarely any empathy or a will to really involve us in this. It seems to me like they do most of it for the public appearances, that behind the scenes they mostly do it the way they want to do it. When we ask a question, the usual answer is, "We will get back to you." But they never do, unless we keep pushing. My opinion is that they are not really doing much.
Ik vind dat ze heel weinig echt doen.
Do you feel like the Dutch authorities are using your trauma against you in that way, that they're not taking you seriously, claiming that your memory might have been affected?
Het is niet zozeer dat ze zeggen je herinneringen kloppen niet, maar wel.
It is not really so much that they say that your memories are wrong, but they do mostly say, well, we were not there. Which can also be translated as, you are just telling us some stories. Maybe it is just another way of saying that they are doubting my memories. When we speak about using my trauma against me, I mostly feel like they are not taking me seriously. From their point of view, I am still this pathetic person that only speaks from her experience of a trauma. But with such attitude, they completely ignore that we also had a professional life afterwards, and that we are not only speaking from our experiences, but also from the professional fields of education or psychology, for example.
What do you want to be done by the Dutch state in order to compensate what has happened, if that's even possible?
In de kern is dat nooit.
Generally speaking, it will be impossible to compensate, because the trauma is there and it is not going to disappear. Also, a financial compensation is pointless from my point of view. If we look at my case, how do you want to compensate me for the fact that I wasn't allowed to study, start a job, or make a career? What I think is much more important is the recognition of the fact that it was simply a bad system. Maybe people had the best intentions, but it was just done in the worst possible way. This has affected so many people in a negative way. Not only me, but also my firstborn son and my younger children. It just went on, and the acknowledgement of this would be really helpful if it is done in a proper way. And this doesn't mean to quickly say sorry, but to actually really acknowledge it in speaking and writing.
Maar zeggen, oh sorry, excuses. Nee, echt erkennen in woord en geschrift
For sure, there are also people who claim financial compensation, and I understand this really well. But for me, the honest recognition of the fact that it was a bad system in which the interests of the adoptive parents were prioritized over those of the children is the most important one.
From your point of view, what needs to be done that such a system as the one of the Afstandsmoeders and Afstandskinderen cannot happen again?
Praten met mensen die het is overkomen.
We have to talk with people who had to live through such an experience, and we need to have a close look at the roots of the system back then. And with this knowledge, we need to critically look at the systems today in order to see whether the same structures still appear. Today, there are still TV shows about young unmarried mothers, and we need to ask ourselves, what are the systems underneath that? As long as we don't take a long critical look at the situation, it continues to happen. And we have to point out that in case of an unwanted, unmarried pregnancy, an adoption is not a one-fits-all type of a solution. Closed adoption can be very harmful. As long as we don't see this, it will keep going on, because there will always be reasons to justify the fact that the demands of the couples who cannot have their own children need to be served. Otherwise, we will keep finding reasons why now is not the right time for a young woman to keep her baby, and why giving the baby for an adoption would presumably be better.
Besloten adoptie gewoon slechte oplossing is.
Wil van Sebille, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. This was Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. If you like this podcast, please feel free to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you want to support our cause, please share this podcast in your social media to reach the utmost attention for the injustice that has been done to Afstandsmoeders and their children in the Netherlands and all over the world. Thank you very much and have a great day.